This is Fat to Fierce. Welcome to the Confidence Chronicles. I'm your host, Amy English. Join me on this empowering adventure towards a healthier relationship with food, body, and self, one delicious bite at a time. Welcome to the Confidence Chronicles. All right, so in today's episode, first of all, I'm just going to share this. My neighbor's mowing the lawn, and I'm going to record this anyway, and hopefully we don't hear the hum of the lawnmower in the background. I have waited entirely too long to record this week's podcast episode, so here we are. This is it, and I'm going to do this even with the lawnmower in the background, but hopefully you won't hear it. Anyway, and I'm not going to worry about editing it or anything like that because I don't do that. In fact, the only edits that ever happen on these episodes are when my son adds the intro and the outro to each episode. So, because from the start of this podcast, I really wanted it to feel just very natural and like we are just having a conversation in a coffee shop right now. Okay. And that reminds me too, bring your favorite beverage, maybe a notebook and a pen or something to take some notes with, because we're going to get into it today. I'm going to take a sip of my coffee while I'm recording this. Because I'm thirsty. Okay. It's almost like I'm on a Facebook Live. Does anyone do those anymore? All right. Anyway, where I want to start with this episode today. One of the many things I love about coaching, okay? Now it's important for me to love what I do, right? And I do love what I do. One of the several reasons why I love it so much is because I love the deep work. I love it for myself and I love it for my clients. And what I love about the deep work in this specific specialty of emotional eating, of food and body confidence, is that we go beyond what we're eating and get to the why we're eating it. Okay. Understanding more about why we pick certain foods. Okay. Why these certain foods hold a connection, right? And understanding the go-to foods that feel like comfort, but often hold a much deeper story. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to invite you, listen, if you're someone who struggles with emotional eating, binge eating, overeating, there's a struggle with food. Maybe you have food noise. Maybe it's just constantly on your mind and you'd like it to stop. Maybe you're even taking a medication that has quieted the food noise for you, which is phenomenal, right? But you know that it's still there and you'd like to understand a little bit more about it and do the work around it. Because listen, I'm going to tell you something, and I probably have shared this before. Most of my clients, many of my clients are taking GLP-1s right now. And not even just my current clients, but previous clients. And the reason that this work is still so helpful is because what we're learning in the world, okay, is that the medication is a tool, right? It's a tool that people are using and it's benefiting a lot of people, which again is wonderful. But it's not like a one and done type of thing, right? And what I'm finding most fascinating, specifically with my current clients who are taking the GLP-1s, is that there's still stress. There's still all the emotions. There's still a lot of emotions tied to the scale. Okay. Anyone who's been on a weight journey for a minute will understand that. The frustration that comes when it's not consistent. Okay. So there's all that frustration that is still around. There is still frustration around food. I know some people who are taking GLP-1s who still continuously crave things like chocolate, right? So while they're a tool, and I am not the type of coach that will say you don't need that. Like, no, that's not what this is about. I am for helping people learn to trust themselves and decide what they need. Okay. So whether that is surgery or whether that is a medication or whether that is a different type of plan, whatever they want to do for weight loss specifically, if that's something that they want to work on. Because I also have clients who are done with that and don't care about it. And I just want to feel comfortable in their skin and be happy where they're at without having to focus on weight loss anymore. So you see what I'm saying? Like, the whole issue with food and body confidence impacts people whether they want to lose weight or not, whether they want to take a medication or not. Like, all of that is like up to the individual to decide. What we do in coaching, specifically the one-on-one coaching program, is we build that self-trust, right? For you to have trust with yourself, for you to gain that confidence, for you to feel empowered and to know that you can make these choices and really just feel better in life, okay? That's what it's all about. It's about moving forward. And sometimes we do need to dip into the past to understand things a little bit better. And it's interesting. I was just talking with a client about this on Friday. We were sharing about how, like kind of how she was sharing how all the things she's gone through in her life have brought her to this place, right? And I think that's just really interesting to take a closer look at. So we all have experiences, we all have circumstances and situations that have happened. A lot of our past is what shapes us to where we are present day. And it's interesting because where am I going with this? Okay, when I think about this, it's like, wow, I have a pretty tumultuous past when it comes to food and body, right? I started dieting at a really young age because I was led to believe there was a problem with my body. I also doubled down on that and, kind of decided to say F you and no, I was gonna learn to be loved regardless. Okay, so there was that resistance to the powers that be wanting me to lose weight. Okay. And then there was the whole connection with food and the emotional eating that went on for 30 plus years and binge eating, right? Turning to food for comfort. When I think about my past, I mean, I was the girl in high school who was continuously asking if I looked fat, right? You could probably ask anybody I went to high school with, and they'd be like, yep. It wouldn't surprise me if they remembered that about me, that I was constantly like asking, do I look fat? Do I look fat? Do I look fat? It was this obsession with my body and obsession with my weight. And sometimes it really fascinates me that I have picked this particular topic as my specialty as a coach. It blows my mind in an amazing way most of the time, but sometimes in a frustrating way because there's still stuff that I'm working through. And it can sometimes make it challenging for me to show up, especially when I'm feeling extra raw, right? Because I've been through it. I get it. But obviously, all of that has brought me to here. I just learned earlier on, 10 years ago, that there was another way to go about this, that I didn't need to continue being in this toxic relationship with food and my body, that I didn't need to be obsessed with my weight and obsessed with being a certain size. I really learned early on that I could take my power back. And I then used that. That's how this became my specialty, right? Anyway, it could have stayed on the same path, right? It could have stayed where I was still like doing another 6 week, 20 pound, blah, blah, blah. It just blows my mind. Anyway, so we're talking about how what we've gone through has brought us to where we are. And where we are is pretty powerful. And to think that to go back and change anything, I really wouldn't. I wouldn't. And that's pretty amazing to say, right? I mean, are there some awful things that happened? Absolutely. But I truly believe that you can learn from those events and you can, with support and guidance and help, right? Find a different way forward. Okay. And ultimately that's what coaching is about. It's about kind of finding a new way forward, a new way that you want to be, a new way that you want to show up in the world. Okay. Anyway, let me stop rambling here. So that's what we were talking about. And heck, I can't remember why I went off on that little path. Anyway, I what we're going to talk about today I think I was talking about the medications. Anyway, you know what? Hold on. Let me get back to the meat and bones, the nitty-gritty of this particular topic and what I wanted to talk about. So I want to talk about the stories that are connected to the foods that we choose, specifically the go-to foods that we choose. And what the heck is a go-to food? All right. Listen, if you've been around for a minute, you might know what a go-to food is. For those of you who are new to the podcast, a go-to food is a food that you typically go to when you're feeling stressed or when you're going to embark on a binge or an emotional eat or an overeat, right? Because remember, those are three very distinct, different types of eatings: overeating, emotional eating, and binge eating. And I did an episode on that a while back. So if you want to look through the archives to find that, if you haven't listened to it, I don't remember what number it is. I should probably do a newer episode about that. I'll table that for a future week. But those are three different types of eating patterns. Okay. Overeating is eating too much. Emotional eating is eating that's tied to a certain emotion, i.e. stress. And then binge eating is when I describe it as like a free for all, right? Like a cyclone in a kitchen, just eating anything and everything you can within a short period of time, literally stuffing yourself. Because not every overeat is an emotional eat. Not every emotional eat is a binge eat, right? They can be very different. They were very different for me, and they can be very different for a lot of people too. So the go-to food is the one that you're like, I've had a shit day, hand over the blank. Okay. What do you typically go for? Or perhaps it's a certain type of food that you will think about or that will pop into your mind. And you might, okay, try this on for size. So I'm going to get into a specific story in a second, but let me just kind of share this that's popping up. So there's a certain type of food that just pops into your mind. I'll use brownies as an example. So it's always brownies. Like brownies are like the first thing that enter your mind when you're feeling, extra vulnerable, you're feeling emotional, maybe you're mad, sad, stressed, whatever. Brownies is kind of the thing you always go for. But then what you'll do is you'll find maybe a healthier version of a brownie or like a protein brownie or something like that to kind of try to get the fix, but not have it be as bad as a brownie, right? Because we're using the language good or bad when we're in these modes. Okay. Never helpful, but that's beside the point. And the thing is that brownie just never escapes your mind, right? It doesn't matter how many fat bombs you eat. Like that brownie is just going to keep coming back. You might make what is it? There's a brownie recipe. I laugh every time I see this on social media. It's a quote unquote healthy brownie. It's like a banana with peanut butter and maple syrup or something. And like you mix it all up and put it in the oven. Don't quote me on the exact ingredients. I've come across it. I've tried it. It's disgusting. Anyway, sometimes you just got to eat the real thing. Okay. But let me just continue on here. So let's just say this brownie has entered your mind. You're trying all these different alternatives, but nothing's going to quench the thirst, right? Nothing's going to get to it. You want that brownie. That's your go-to food. Okay. And I'm going to share some stories today that kind of illustrate how that becomes a go-to food. We're going to kind of understand a little bit better the emotional connection between that food and the stories that kind of keep that going. And the reason why this is important, listen, I'm not knocking brownies. I'm not even knocking the healthy brownies. I found it disgusting. Other people might love it. Okay. We're all different. We all have different tastes and opinions. Perhaps saying it was disgusting was a bit harsh upon reflection now. Moving on. I'm going to have to go find it now. Maybe I'll try it again. Anyway, I'm fiery today. My point, the stories. What are the stories behind the foods? And a lot of times these stories might have been started like years and years and years ago, decades ago even. In fact, the first one I'm going to share with you is my story about buttercream. And I've talked about buttercream throughout this podcast, right? I may have even shared a little bit of this story, but I'm going to get into it again because it's important, right? So, buttercream icing has forever, as long as I can remember, been my go-to food of choice. Okay. I have talked about when I would have a stressful day at work. I can remember, I see this as I'm talking about it. I see it happening. In my imagination. I would, and this is specifically when we were living in the Connecticut and like lower New York area. Because I remember the road I was driving down and the grocery store I would go to. But I would leave work after a stressful day. I would stop at the grocery store and go to the bakery section, and I would get one of those little birthday cakes, right? Actually, usually sometimes I'd get a big birthday cake. And then there's the whole story about when we first moved to Connecticut. I shared that before too, but let me stick with my specific example. Bakery section, birthday cake, chocolate chip cookies. And I would get it home and I would take the cookie and I would scrape it along the cake to get the buttercream icing. And that was my go-to food. Okay. Buttercream icing. And it wasn't until like this was just always a thing. And I would often think to myself, like, why buttercream? Even when my daughter got hurt back in, 2021, I need buttercream, right? My uncle passed away recently. Buttercream. That was like a year or two ago. Buttercream. I want some buttercream with strawberries, right? Buttercream. Why buttercream? And it wasn't until fairly recently, I don't know, time's all warped in my head. It was in with the last year and a half that I realized the emotional connection with buttercream. And it's tied to my grandma, my nanny, who passed away. She used to make homemade birthday cakes from a grandpa and for herself every year, and we'd go over to their house to celebrate their birthday and eat the cake. And it was interesting because when I would reflect on buttercream, and in fact it's happening right now as I'm talking about buttercream, I see her birthday cake sitting on the cake plate with the pretty crystal lid over it, right? She was fancy. And it was decorated beautifully with like white frosting with blue flowers. Like I can picture it. Okay. It's there. And the connection here, and this is what's super interesting. Okay. This is the really fascinating part about this story. That side of the family, that was my dad's mom. Okay. And that side of the family is the family that I related to the most in terms of weight. Okay. Because that was the family that was a little bit heavier. I mean, a lot of them, would be considered obese from a medical standpoint. They were the heavier side of the family. And my mom's side of the family was the thin side, right? And I never truly felt like I aligned with that side of the family. I felt more comfortable with my dad's side of the family. So it's just interesting to me. It has been interesting to kind of, as I'm peeling back these layers, right, to see the connection with buttercream. It's not just about the cake and that my nanny made a cake, even though that is a beautiful, special memory. It's also linked to the fact that as a young kid who was picked on and teased and put on diets at a really early age, felt more connected with the side of the family that had a homemade birthday cake. Pretty fascinating, right? It wasn't just the icing, okay? It's what the icing represented, okay? Which is comfort, belonging, and an emotional connection. When I tell you, like I can feel it even I've done a lot of healing on this, but I can even feel the emotion coming up a little bit as I'm talking about this because this is like my part of my story. right? This is part of my story. And why that cake, that image of that cake always pops into my head, right? When I'm thinking about buttercream. Now, it is interesting because I haven't had buttercream in a while, but even on my really hard days, and this kind of goes to the episode last week with the thoughts, right? When I'm having a really hard day, that buttercream will pop in my head. I know enough now to understand why that's happening, to understand why my brain is producing that image and that thought. And I know enough that I don't have to give into it, right? That I've done the work around that. I've healed that. But it is fascinating that it still comes up. And I think it's just worth sharing the story because I'm not the only one who has like this kind of go to food with this history and story wrapped around it, right? When you think about it, the human brain, the human being is so fascinating the way we can do this kind of stuff, right? So, in to illustrate how I'm not alone, I'm also going to share a client story from a few years ago. I had a client who had the same thing, but not with buttercream. Hers was peanut butter. Okay. Peanut butter was her go to. If peanut butter was in the house, it was about to be gone. Okay. She could not be in the same room with peanut butter. And that was a lot of case with me. I couldn't be in the same room with a birthday cake or buttercream icing, right? Because it's like I couldn't trust myself. This is how she was with peanut butter. Okay. And we were in a session and we were talking about this, and she was sharing about the peanut butter. And I just asked a very simple question: why peanut butter? Kind of like I've asked myself, why buttercream? Like, what is it with this magical buttercream? Why peanut butter? And so, upon reflection, what ended up coming up in her mind, as she was thinking about it, was that peanut butter was something that she had as a kid when the family was going through some rough stuff. Her dad would make ice cream sundaes with peanut butter sauce. She hadn't thought about this in years, okay? She hadn't thought about this in decades, but it bubbled up as a memory during a coaching session. And so we just sat with that. Okay, because listen, and I'm going to share this in case anybody listening is going to practice thinking why X food, okay, why this, why that. Be gentle with yourself with whatever memory bubbles up, okay? It's it it can be emotional, right? It can, as you saw a few minutes ago. I even get emotional talking about this for me. It was emotional when peanut butter presented itself for my client, right? Because we this is the awareness, all right? This is the awareness I'm always talking about, okay? This is the stuff that once you see it, you can't unsee it, okay? And you want to have a whole bunch of compassion with yourself and a whole bunch of understanding for the way that we work as humans, right? And the way that we hold on to these things and we remember these things sometimes even subconsciously, right? That we're doing to help us feel better. So peanut butter for her became a very soothing, comforting thing. And that was why when life continued to throw its curveballs, decades later, peanut butter was the go-to. Why, when peanut butter was in the house, it was going to be eaten, right? It's that comfort. It is that, again, it's that belonging, right? It's that emotional connection that we have with a specific food. And when you're somebody who has struggled with food, and let's face it, okay, we know by now, millions upon millions upon millions of people struggle with food. Not even if they don't even necessarily have a weight issue, but they have a food issue, okay? Food has an emotional connection. And a lot of times people have that one specific gateway food, kind of like a gateway drug, right? That they reach for in times of heavy emotions. I mean, and it can be negative or positive. It could be like your typical negative emotions like stress, loneliness, overwhelm, boredom, things like that. But can also happen when you're feeling really excited or really proud and you kind of want to celebrate, right? It can go both ways. So I think that's really important to know. as well. All right. Now, here's the thing. And I think that it's helpful to recognize this gateway food. I'm going to describe it as a gateway food, right? Because a lot of times that can see there's two ways. And I talked about one earlier where we'll notice that gateway food pop up in our minds and we try to do anything and everything to avoid it, ultimately leading back to the gateway food. Okay. Because I can't tell you how many times I thought about buttercream and I'd be like, well, let me just have some yogurt. Or let me have, maybe Cool Whip. Cool Whip has a similar consistency, not really. But let me have Cool Whip or let me have something else instead of buttercream. And I'd ultimately end up I'd eat all these other things on the path to ultimately having the buttercream. Okay. So that wasn't useful. Or I would go ahead and eat the buttercream, right? So I'd get the cake with the cookies on the way home from work and I'd eat the buttercream. And then I'd feel so bad and be so mad at myself that it would just become an F it day. We all know what an F it day is, right? F it. Now that I've been this bad, I might as well go eat this, and that. Okay. Because that was also a regular theme in my life. Well, I screwed this up, so I might as well go ahead and get pizza for dinner. I might as well go ahead and, have this, and that because I already messed up. So why not? Okay. Also, not useful. Okay. So that's the way that this gateway food can impact us. Okay. And that's how it can lead what might start out as a couple of bites can very easily become an emotional eat leading to a binge eat. I mean, I'm thinking about it right now as I'm talking about this, and I cannot recall a time prior to this work, right? Prior to me doing the work where I would only have a few bites of the frosting. Like when I think back to, over 8-9 years ago, and I would have the frosting, it was always just eat it turned into a binge. It always ended up in a binge. I can't recall a time when it did not. And what's interesting is now, present day, I'll still have cake. I mean, as I mentioned, it's been a little while, but I can just have one piece and I'm fine with it. And that's just always fascinating to me. Like Publix is our supermarket here, and they always have, I'm sure a lot of supermarkets do this now, but in their bakery section, they always have like the individual slices of cake, right? If I'm in the mood for a piece of cake, I'll get a slice of cake. It's like not a big deal. And the thing is, though, I can do that. Whereas before, that wouldn't have been enough. I needed to have the entire cake. And I think that's another good point to make on this is that this isn't about giving up your gateway food. Okay. This is not about saying can't have that. Nope. Because we know that doesn't work. Okay. That what we restrict will only persist, right? We're not saying no, can't ever have that again. I've tried that way too many times. It does not work. My client with the peanut butter tried that way too many times. Did not work. Okay. It's not about banning that food. It's about reclaiming your power from with the food. Okay. And realizing that you are in charge, not the food. And when we think about it a little bit deeper, we don't even have to blame the food. Okay. It's not the food's fault. It's also not your fault. All right. It was just likely a time in your life when an emotional connection was formed with a specific kind of food for a very specific reason. And without the awareness, that just grew over time. And I'm going to say this, many of my clients are around my age. Okay. We're Gen Xers. Nobody was talking about awareness and coaching and therapy when I was growing up. Okay. It just wasn't happening. I don't even know if all the millennials grew up with that kind of awareness. Okay. The Gen Zers, they're getting it. Here's an interesting thought. My kids are Gen Z, but here's an interesting thought. And I was just talking to my therapist about this the other day. Yes, I have a therapist. Very important. I've probably told you that before. Anyway, we were talking about how, how the human consciousness is raising, awareness is raising, all this other stuff. And I was just like, wow, like this just kind of illustrates how important it is to do this work because you kind of have a choice. Either stay where you're at and continue to suffer and struggle, or be willing to do some of the work and raise the awareness and kind of this is about raising your consciousness, right? Becoming more conscious of the specific things that you're doing in your life that you don't want to be doing anymore, because there's a reason why you continue to do them, right? There's stuff going on behind the scenes. And listen, I'll never tell you that I have figured out all of, like, everything about me. Of course not. I mean, I don't know that that ever happens. If it does, I'll let you know, but I don't know that it's ever going to happen. But the whole key is just to continue, like, learning more and becoming more aware. And does it sting in the beginning? Does it hurt? Is it upsetting? Is it hard? Yes, it is. Is it worth it? Oh, hell yeah. Right? Because as you raise awareness and see your patterns and understand more on a conscious level about the links specifically with food and body and the stuff that I talk about in the Fat to Fierce world, once you see this stuff for yourself, that's when you get to decide if you want to continue to hold it or let it go. And a lot of times what's really interesting is just raising the awareness is enough to kind of help some things unravel, and they just kind of unravel on their own behind the scenes. And then that's when you realize, oh, this thing doesn't have the pull like it used to have, right? I might think about some buttercream when, on a hard day or whatever, but I'm not getting in the car and driving to the store to get it, right? Which is completely different than how it used to be in the past. Or I'm not like whipping up a batch, right, in the kitchen right now, because I got all the stuff. I bake here periodically, so I've got the stuff in my pantry, but I don't whip up a batch of it like I used to in the past. Oh my gosh. I'd whip up a batch of buttercream and just be like, I'll put it in the freezer, so this way I have it the next time I bake. You want to know how long that buttercream lasted in the freezer? You don't have to guess, all right? It didn't. Anyway, awareness puts you back in the driver's seat, all right? And that's the whole point of this work. That's the whole point of coaching, all right? Coaching is about helping you see the roadblocks that are in your way so that you can determine how you want to move past them, move with them, go over them, under them, whatever you're going to decide to do, right? With understanding, compassion, curiosity, all those wonderful feelings, okay? So listen, if you want to explore your go-to food, your gateway food with curiosity, here are some questions that you can use to help with that. And listen, I want to say this. If you would like support doing this, then I'm going to invite you to reach out and schedule a connection call with me. Okay. You can go right to my website, amyenglishcc.com, book a connection call. On that call, we'll talk about this. Listen, even if you just want to do 1 or 2 sessions, you can. All right. It's okay. We just want to work on this for a little bit. I can give you all the details about doing that. But here, because it listen, I will never say, like, I didn't do this work alone, okay? I have been consistently working with a coach and or a therapist for the last, I started working with a therapist, gosh, in my early 20s. But coaching, I started in 2015, working with my first life coach, right? And I think they're both different, right? Therapy is different than coaching, okay? Because as a coach, I'm not a therapist, right? So I don't work on trauma and things like that. As a coach, what I do is I help people see, like, their patterns, what's going on, what's getting in their way, the obstacles, things like that. Will things come up? Absolutely. But I'm always very clear, like, if there is some trauma that surfaces, like, that's going to be best to work with a therapist. I started working with a therapist when I was in my early 20s, and which is interesting because, yeah, that would have been the 90s, which is kind of wild. Anyway, I started working with a counselor at that point because I was just dealing with some stuff. and then picked it back up again after Garrett and I were married and living in Connecticut because I was like really ridiculously homesick, which I've talked about before, which is another cake story, right? Because that's when I was going to the store to get the cakes every day. Anyway, and watching Matlock. Whew. Anyway, yes. So I've spent a lot of time working with a therapist, and that's very beneficial. Where the difference with coaching for me was that coaching gave me tools that I could do on my own. And also that helped me take different action, understand my thoughts more, understand my emotions more, reconnect with my body, all of that good stuff, which I think is why it resonated so deeply with me and why I wanted to pursue this as a profession. Anyway, here are the questions without further ado. That was my point. If you want to get support with this, schedule a connection call. Anyway, here are the questions. If you want to explore your gateway food, what's your earliest memory of this particular food? Like, when did it start? What does it remind you of? What's the memory that comes up? Who are the people? What's around this food, right? And what feeling are you trying to create or avoid with this particular food? And again, this is the awareness that's going to help you take your power back instead of feeling like you are powerless with food. And as you become more aware, what happens is that awareness is kind of what helps you create the pause. Like we've talked about the power of the pause, right? Practicing the pause. Because when you start to pause, that's when you create a choice. That's when you make a decision. That's when you decide. That's where all your power is. That's why the pause is so important. And when you can start to enjoy food with intention, it no longer controls you. And that's the goal. All right. That's what we're working towards. This isn't about like, oh, I can't have that anymore. I shouldn't have that. Oh, that was bad, blah, blah, blah. No, it's about realizing that you are you have the power to decide what you want and what you don't want. And even if you're going to choose to eat something, when you do it with intention and you do it mindfully and consciously and aware, it's no longer a reaction. It's a conscious act. And that just changes everything. Puts you in your power. And I think that's why so many of my clients have described this particular work that we do in Fat to Fierce as empowering, right? Because for so long, we have lived disempowered, feeling disempowered from food, feeling like we have no control, feeling like the food noise controls us. We can't stop it, blah, 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 right? And instead, we flip that script and realize like, no, you are absolutely in charge. And that feels amazing. Okay. I'm just going to do a quick scan of my notes to see if there was anything else that I wanted to mention. I tend to go off topic a little bit, so hopefully we were able to wrap this up with a bow. Okay. Take some time to journal and reflect on this, and head over and listen to any of the other episodes that maybe you haven't listened to in a while, or that you haven't heard before, specifically the one about the difference between overeating, emotional eating, and binge eating. I want to say, maybe that was episode 7 or 9. I don't know. It was in like the early stages of the podcast. And then, of course, please, you can send me an email, amy@amyenglishcc.com. You can go to the website, amyenglishcc.com, book a connection call. There are ways to get support with this, and I would be honored to work with you or just have a conversation. All right? I hope you have a great week. Bye. Are you ready to break free from stress eating and body shaming? It's time to get fierce. Fat to Fierce is a self-paced program that helps you build a new foundation of strength and balance. without the toxic dieting mindset. This non-diet approach focuses on mindful eating, body acceptance, and lasting transformation. It's time to reclaim your power and find peace with food, your body, and yourself. Visit amyenglishcc.com to get started today.